What if the Reformation never happened? Picture Europe without the crack of a hammer on a church door in Wittenberg, without pamphlets swirling like leaves in a storm, without a continent splitting along lines of doctrine and power. Imagine a single, unbroken Christian West into the 1500s. Cathedrals still the heart of every city, one pope, one faith, and the Habsburg eagle stretching its wings over a calmer, tighter map. Would there be fewer wars? Or would the pressure build and burst somewhere else? Would science slow, or be forced into different rooms, quieter rooms, where ideas moved behind closed doors? Tonight, we step into a strange mirror, a world where Martin Luther never launches a revolt and the Protestant Reformation just doesn't happen. First, the world we know. In 1517, Martin Luther, a German monk with a restless conscience, questions the sale of indulgences, the notion that money can shorten soul's time in purgatory. His 95 Theses are a provocation and a lightning rod. Thanks to the printing press, his words leap borders. Princes who resent the Pope's taxes, merchants who dream of freer cities, scholars who ache for reform. They find a voice in Luther. The church responds, the lines harden. Luther refuses to recant. Within decades, Europe fractures into competing confessional states. Lutheran North, Catholic South, reformers everywhere. Wars follow. The Holy Roman Empire fractures into a chessboard of loyalties. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 draws a line in the sand, whose realm is religion. England, driven by Henry VIII's dynastic crisis and Roman frustrations, breaks with Rome and builds a church under the crown. The Dutch, Calvinist and stubbornly independent, defy Catholic Spain, become a republic, and invent new ways of banking and trade. By 1618, the 30 Years' War, like a storm that won't move off the coast, pounds Central Europe, leaving towns in ashes and fields empty of people. Westphalia in 1648 ends it with a new idea: sovereign states that answer to no higher earthly power. Meanwhile, competition on the high seas explodes. Spain and Portugal face restless Protestant challengers, England and the Dutch Republic, who slice into their empires, capture trade routes, and lay the foundations of the modern global economy. That is the road we walked. Now, the fork. What if those first steps never land? No Luther, no Wittenberg spark. Reform-minded clergy still exist, complaints still simmer, but the big break never comes. How could that happen? It starts with timing and temperament. Luther's doubts remain inside the monastery walls, or his superiors, alarmed but patient, move quickly to rein in indulgence abuses. A sympathetic pope, imagine a pontiff with the financier's calm of Leo X, but the shrewd pastoral style of a later reformer, convenes a council early, before the fires rage. A few strong bishops clamp down on the worst salesmen, a few discreet doctrinal clarifications, and the fuse sputters. The printing press still hums, but the pamphlets don't carry a revolution. They carry small renovations. The storm never forms. England stands at its own precipice. Henry VIII wants an annulment. In our world, Rome refuses and England tears away. In this alternate path, the same church, eager to avoid a second crack in the wall, finds a bridge. A legalistic loophole, a complex dispensation. This hierarchy wrote the rulebook after all. And England stays Catholic. No act of supremacy. No Church of England. The great tides shift. Without a break, the Counter-Reformation does not exist as a reaction. Instead, we get a quieter, earlier reform, a renovation from within rather than a combat posture from without. The Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, might still arise, not as shock troops against heresy, but as elite educators and scientists tied tightly to Rome and to Catholic monarchs. University networks grow, but under one umbrella. Now, the map. Look closely at the Low Countries. In our world, the Dutch Revolt fused faith, commerce, and local freedoms into a republic that reshaped global finance. In this timeline, without Calvinism as a rallying banner, the revolt loses its ideological backbone. Grievances remain: taxes, heavy Spanish hands, the desire of cities to breathe. But Madrid's grip loosens just enough through negotiated reforms. the cutting edge of revolt blunts. No independent Dutch republic, at least not in the 16th century. Amsterdam stays an imperial port. The stock exchange? It arrives later, and it arrives under the stamp of a crown. Now pivot to the Holy Roman Empire. With fewer princes choosing new confessions to justify autonomy, Charles V and Habsburg Emperor, King of Spain, lord over an empire where the sun truly struggles to set, has an easier time. He doesn't create a unified Germany. The patchwork seams are deep and old, but the pieces sit a little tighter. Imperial institutions harden. The imperial court becomes the place where disputes are settled, and Rome's courts too. No 30 Years' War empties German villages. The demographic crash never happens. Central Europe is not broken by 1648. It is managed, constrained, somewhat stale, and very Catholic. What does that mean for the Ottomans pressing from the southeast? Here, the lack of internal religious fracture matters. In 1529, when Suleiman the Magnificent stands at Vienna's gates, an unfractured Habsburg world can rally more money, more men, more focus. The siege is repelled, barely, as in our world, but with a stronger coalition and a stronger afterglow. The Habsburgs hold Hungary tighter earlier. The borderlands still bleed, but the Ottoman advance is checked sooner. The long arc of pushback begins earlier than 1683. Southeastern Europe drifts more decisively into the Catholic orbit. What about France? Remember, Catholic unity doesn't mean political harmony. The French crown still resents Habsburg encirclement. The Italian wars continue, but Paris can no longer play the religious game, no aligning with Protestant princes against Spain for the sake of balance. So France reaches for other levers, alliances with smaller Italian states, and, yes, sometimes with the Ottomans, because geopolitics writes its own set of commandments. Europe's balance of power still strains, but the conflicts are more dynastic than confessional. Cross the ocean. In our world, the papal line in the Treaty of Tordesillas carved the non-European world in two, west to Spain, east to Portugal. Protestant powers eventually ignored it. But in a Catholic-only Atlantic, that line matters longer. England stays Catholic and, officially, respectful of the Pope's arrangements. Does that mean the English sit home? Hardly. Monarchs are not docile. They pressure Rome for new lines, for renegotiated spheres, for slivers of Caribbean and North Atlantic pie. Papal diplomacy becomes cartography by negotiation. A sanctioned English presence might grow in the North Atlantic, Newfoundland fisheries, green cold coasts, while Spain and Portugal keep their warm water empires. No Puritans flee to build New England. No pilgrims at Plymouth. The cultural DNA of North America changes. The French, also Catholic but fiercely independent of Habsburg control, intensify their presence along the St. Lawrence and the Mississippi. Without English pressure, French Canada spreads deep and wide, not just a ribbon, but a blanket. The Gulf becomes a francophone lake. Spanish Florida extends upward. A Catholic patchwork of colonial charters covers the eastern half of North America, a quilt sewn by Bourbon France, Habsburg Spain, and a cautious, papally sanctioned England along the cold edge of the map. Now feel the tremor under the economy. Without an independent Dutch republic, capitalism develops under crowns instead of city councils. Banking houses tie themselves to monarchs. Stock markets form later with royal charters and heavier clerical oversight. Risk moves more slowly. Innovation doesn't stop. It trickles along different channels. The great dangerous burst of maritime privateers, those legalized pirates who fed English and Dutch coffers, is smaller, later more controlled, and that reshapes the slave trade. In our world, the British and the Dutch become giants of the transatlantic trade, boosting its scale with their ships, ports, and insurance markets. Here, without their early aggressive entry, the trade remains largely Iberian. It is still brutal. It still scars continents. But the machinery around it, the market's endless gears, is less expansive, less optimized for profit by northern financiers. Abolition might arrive later without the British evangelical push of the late 1700s, but Catholic orders, Jesuits and others, become louder moral voices in Iberian courts. The shape, not the cruelty, changes. Education and science. This is where our timeline gets tricky. In our world, The Reformation accelerates literacy. People want to read the Bible for themselves. Printers churn. Ideas spread fast. But the scientific revolution wasn't a Protestant invention. Copernicus was a canon, Galileo a Catholic. Jesuits charted the heavens and drew world maps. In our alternate world, science grows inside Catholic institutions. Jesuit colleges become even more central, elite, interconnected, and monitored. Censorship is tighter. Yes, Galileo's trial still casts a shadow. But without the existential fear of Protestantism tearing sheep from the flock, Rome may be less defensive, or perhaps more complacent. The Chinese rites controversy might tilt another way. Imagine a pope more willing to accept Chinese ancestral rites as cultural, not religious, letting Jesuits embed deeper at the Ming and then Qing courts. Europe's relationship with China tightens academically. Eastern astronomy, Western mathematics. Exchanges run richer through a single Catholic channel. But what about the Enlightenment? The pressure wave that followed Westphalia, confessional stalemates, skepticism, secular philosophies, diffuses differently. In a church-unified Europe, Enlightenment still comes, but with a Catholic accent. Philosophes still chafe at censors, but many are educated by Jesuits and reformist clergy. Voltaire still winks, Diderot still catalogs. Yet the institutions pushing back wear robes, not wigs. The church sponsors some science to prove the order of God's creation. It stifles other experiments that threaten its narratives. The result is a slower, more curated pantry of ideas. And England, the usual engine of industrial timing. In our world, a Protestant, commercial England absorbs Dutch financial genius after 1688's Glorious Revolution. The Bank of England, central debt markets, patent systems, and coal-fed factories follow. In this timeline, the Glorious Revolution either never happens or looks utterly different. Without the fear of Catholic absolutism, without a Protestant-Dutch alliance to invite a Dutch prince onto the English throne, the Stuarts hold power longer. Constitutional limits arrive softer later, negotiated with bishops as much as with bankers. The financial revolution that greased the wheels of industry moves slower. That doesn't mean no industrial revolution. The coal is still in the ground. The tinkerers still tinker. But the first great cluster of innovation might slide south and east. Northern Italy, with its guild traditions and silk mills, becomes a crucible. Or a Habsburg-managed Rhine, Cologne to Vienna, builds water wheels into steam engines under imperial patents. France, if it can stabilize its finances without the fire of a revolutionary break, becomes a second cradle. Lyons silk, Saint-Étienne's arms, Paris's salons feeding engineers instead of pamphleteers. By 1800, you might see a web of early industry running Milan, Turin, Vienna, with Catholic banks in tow. Now, the revolutionary wave. In our world, America breaks first. A Protestant merchant colony confederation rebels against an island monarchy, writes a constitution, and inspires Paris. Here, without those English colonies, and without the same tax crisis triggered by the 7 Years' War, the spark lands elsewhere. In the late 1700s, it might land in the French Caribbean, where plantation elites and enslaved people sit upon a powder keg. Or it might light in New Spain, where Creole elites chafe under Madrid's rules, Jesuit expulsions, and royal monopolies. The first modern Republic of the Americas could be Spanish-speaking, born in Mexico City or Caracas, its creed Catholic in ceremony but radical in structure. And when France finally convulses, as its finances probably still demand, its revolution may be less inflected by a recent American example and more explosive or more contained, depending on Bourbon's success with Spain. If the Bourbons managed to unify interests across Paris and Madrid after the War of the Spanish Succession, still a problem in this world, still a tug of war, then French collapse may be delayed. If not, the French Revolution still comes, but its export looks different. No British Navy prowling to check Napoleon. No Dutch trade empire funding northern coalitions. The wars of the 1790s and 1800s could end with a Franco-Spanish superstate crashing into a Habsburg German bloc along the Rhine, while Catholic England watches from a quieter perch. Listen to the language of the streets in this world. In North America, Spanish and French dominate from Quebec to New Orleans to Mexico City, while English lingers in narrow, cold, papally blessed strips along the North Atlantic fisheries. The Mississippi sounds French. The Great Plains, baptized by Spanish missions, echo with new names. In Europe, German remains the language of craftsmen and lawyers, from Nuremberg to Vienna, but it's all under an imperial church calendar. And Rome hums with the paperwork of the world. Cardinals are geostrategists, popes are map makers. Midway through, pause with me here. If the Reformation never happens, who do you think becomes the dominant power by 1700? A consolidated Habsburg realm, a Franco-Spanish Bourbon axis, or a revived papacy steering the balance? Drop your take below. I read them all. And if you're into these deep dives through alternate timelines, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next twist of history. Now step back and check the scars this world avoids, and the prices it pays. The 30 Years' War never empties German towns. That is mercy. Yet the absence of confessional pluralism slows the spread of tolerant secular governance. The Westphalian blueprint, states as equals in law, arrives later, perhaps after the War of the Spanish Succession forces a grand congress. Sovereignty is decided by tall hats and dynastic charts, not treaties etched in new principles. The modern nation-state still emerges, but the birth is quieter, longer, less clear. Universities look different. Without Protestant universities in the North competing for students and ideas, the great schools of Europe line up under Jesuit influence, or under diocesan umbrellas. The curriculum is classical, mathematical, scholastic. Medicine advances through monastic hospitals and royal academies. Natural philosophy moves cautiously, but it moves. In the margins, quiet skeptics write. In Spain and Italy, naturalists catalog the New World with theological footnotes. In France, engineers build canals and bridges with saints over the lintels. The steam engine still arrives, but it's explained in catechisms of order and law, as much as in the language of human mastery. Religion in everyday life breathes differently too. Parish life is thicker, festivals louder, saints more present. There's less room for the inner solitary reading of Scripture that defined many Protestant devotions. Faith is public, shared, supervised. But don't mistake that for stasis. Catholic reform from within always had restless souls, Teresa of Avila, Ignatius Loyola. And in this world, their spiritual descendants have more space to redirect energy into missions, hospitals, and schools. The safety net of the church expands. The individual conscience negotiates. What of Eastern Christians? The Orthodox world still stands. Moscow still rises, a third Rome in its own imagination. Without the confessional chaos of the West, Russia's rise is less framed as the guardian of balance against Protestant and Catholic blocs. It grows anyway, across Siberia to the Pacific, focused on its own imperial arc. When Russia meets an industrializing Habsburg-German-Italy corridor and a Franco-Spanish Atlantic machine, the diplomatic geometry of the 19th century is a triangle, not a pentagon. There are human lives tucked into every fold of this alternate map. In German villages spared by war, the grandchildren of men who would have died in 1630 instead plant orchards, build workshops, and apprentice under masters in towns that never burned. In Mexico City, a Creole lawyer argues that Madrid has no right to tax a people God has blessed with its own lands. A Jesuit-trained printer nods and sets the type. In a Paris laboratory blessed by a bishop who loves lenses, a young scientist polishes a mirror and sketches the cratered face of the moon. In Rome, a cardinal draws a new line across the Atlantic in ink, sighs, and prays that kings will keep their promises. By 1850, the industrial map is unmistakably altered. There are factories along the Po and the Danube, royal arsenals in Vienna that double as engineering schools, and a French-Spanish merchant marine that dominates the Caribbean. England's coal is still wealth, but its institutions matured later, so its takeoff curves in the 1820s instead of the 1780s. North America is a mosaic of Catholic colonies turned new polities. A vast French-speaking heartland across the Mississippi, a powerful New Spain that debates federalism in Spanish, and a smaller English-speaking confederation hugging the North Atlantic ice, trading cod for manufactured goods from Milan and Lyon. When these new American states seek independence, they write constitutions echoing natural law and canon law concepts alongside Republican theory. Church bells ring at inaugurations. Does this world become less free? Not inevitably. It becomes differently free. Press freedoms arrive selectively, attached to royal charters and bishops' toleration, expanding with commercial needs and contracting with doctrinal flare-ups. Women find familiar barriers, yet in Catholic hospitals and teaching orders, some carve real authority. Abbesses managing vast estates, sisters running schools and clinics that matter. Abolition stumbles, then advances. It's argued from pulpits and thrones, not just in dissenting chapels and parliament. When slavery finally falls across the Americas here, it may do so under the signature of a Bourbon king swayed by bishops, not a British Act of Parliament alone, or of a Spanish-speaking Congress in Mexico City invoking both natural rights and the image of a mother who watches from a basilica. And science, that constant river, finds its way around the rocks. Darwin still writes, but he writes into a world with stronger ecclesiastical review. His ideas meet different allies and different skeptics. Mendel, an Augustinian friar in our world, still counts peas in a monastery garden, and his work finds eager readers in Jesuit colleges that love clean mathematics. Pasteur baptizes his children, then his lab bench. He saves lives on every continent. The fit isn't perfect, but it's tight. By the dawn of the 20th century, the old Catholic unity is more layered than solid. States modernize, parliaments grow teeth, and the Church navigates a world of telegraphs and factories. The Grand Alliances form, Bourbon heirs and Habsburg technocrats, a Catholic England finally roaring into full industry, and a Russia with its own orthodox gravity. The Great War we know might arrive anyway, born of rail timetables and brittle pride, but it breaks over different trenches and different flags. The United States, as we know it, never answers the call, because it never exists in that form. Instead, a Francophone Republic of the Mississippi debates neutrality. A Mexican-led federation weighs opportunity. And an English Confederation of the North Atlantic sends ships under a blue flag with a gold key, a papally gifted emblem fluttering at the mast. At the core of all this is a simple truth. Remove one fracture line, and the stress moves. The Reformation's absence spares Europe certain horrors, delays certain freedoms, reroutes certain genius. It doesn't create a paradise or a prison, it creates a different maze. So, if the Reformation never happened, the map is rewritten but not erased. Habsburgs hold longer, Bourbons spread wider, England speaks softer, later. Dutch daring becomes royal habit. North America prays in Spanish and French. Science is slower to shout and quicker to negotiate. The Church wears many faces, censor, patron, diplomat, and sometimes midwife to the very changes it fears. History breathes, adjusts, and keeps moving. And that's the lesson our mirror sends back. History is fragile, but it is also stubborn. A single monk's silence would not freeze the world. It would push the river into new channels. The banks would crumble somewhere else. The flood would find another path. The question for us isn't whether there would be change, but what kind. And that, in a way, is the most haunting answer of all. Until next time, keep your maps close and your imagination closer, because one small silence in Wittenberg could have made the bells ring very differently across the world.